I was the only one sitting there without a gift under the tree, but I didn't get upset. I reached into my briefcase and everything changed. My name is Harold Brennan. I'm 67 years old and I live by myself in a 2-bedroom ranch house just outside Charlotte, North Carolina. It's been 7 years since my wife Joyce passed away. We were married for 39 years. She had this laugh that could fill up a room, and she knew how to balance a checkbook better than most accountants I knew. Losing her hit me like a freight train, but over time, I learned to find my footing again. These days, I keep a pretty regular schedule. Up at 6, coffee by 6:15, and I check the financial news while the sun comes up. I've got my small garden out back, and I spend afternoons reading or working on my computer. Evenings are for the local news and maybe a documentary. Nothing fancy, but it works for me. I used to be a district manager for Mutual Trust Insurance. Spent 42 years there, worked my way up from claims adjuster to managing a whole region. Started when I was 25, fresh out of college with a business degree and no real idea what I wanted to do with my life. Insurance wasn't glamorous, but it was steady work with good people. And I found I had a knack for helping folks understand their coverage options. By the time I was 30, I was handling complex commercial accounts. By 40, I was training new agents and developing risk assessment protocols. When I made district manager at 48, I was overseeing 150 agents across 3 states. I knew insurance inside and out, risk assessment, policy structures, investment products, claims processing, regulatory compliance. The company treated me well, gave me a decent pension when I retired at 65. I thought I'd earned some respect over those 4 decades. I'd helped thousands of families protect their financial futures, guided young agents through their first big sales, and built relationships with clients that lasted decades. When people had questions about insurance or investments, they called me. When the home office needed someone to explain complex policies to confused customers, they sent me. But my son Roger and his wife Beverly, well, they started treating me differently after Joyce died. At first, I figured it was just grief making things awkward. Joyce had been the social glue in our family, the one who organized gatherings and made sure everyone stayed in touch. Without her, we all felt a little lost. But as the years went by, it became clear that Beverly had her own ideas about my place in the family, and they didn't include much input from me. Roger's a good kid. Well, he's 42 now, but he's still my boy. He works as a regional sales manager for a medical equipment company, covers the Carolinas and Georgia. Does well for himself, nice house in the suburbs with a 2-car garage and a manicured lawn. He and Beverly have 2 kids, Sandra, who's 16 and interested in graphic design, and Glenn, who's 14 and lives for baseball. Roger's always been a people pleaser, the kind of guy who avoids confrontation and tries to keep everyone happy. In high school, he was the kid who'd agree with whoever was talking, even if it contradicted what he'd said 5 minutes earlier. Joyce used to worry he'd never learn to stand up for himself. Turns out she was right. Somewhere along the way, Roger started letting Beverly make most of the family decisions. And Beverly, she's got this way of making you feel like you're in the way without saying it directly. She's smart, works as a corporate training specialist for a big consulting firm, teaches communication skills and leadership development. She knows exactly how to manage people, how to redirect conversations, how to make her preferences seem like the obvious choice. It started small after Joyce's funeral. Family dinners got less frequent. When I'd offer to help with something, fixing a leaky faucet, looking over their insurance policies, sharing what I'd learned about college savings plans, Beverly would smile politely and say they had it covered. When I'd offer financial advice, and after 42 years in insurance and investments, I knew a thing or two about protecting family assets, Beverly would listen with that patient expression people use when they're waiting for you to finish talking so they can change the subject. "That's interesting, Harold," she'd say. "We'll definitely consider that." Then the conversation would somehow shift to Sandra's school project or Glenn's baseball schedule or Beverly's latest work assignment. The message was clear. My input wasn't needed. They had newer information, better connections, more current knowledge. I was from a different era when things were simpler but less sophisticated. When I suggested we set up education savings accounts for my grandkids' 529 plans, that would grow tax-free and help with college costs, Beverly told Roger they had it handled and didn't need my help. She said they preferred to research their options thoroughly before making any decisions. That was 3 years ago. As far as I know, they're still researching. Sandra's a sharp kid, always sketching in notebooks and talking about art school. Glenn's got talent on the baseball field and dreams of playing in college. Good kids with real potential, but college costs keep going up. And the earlier you start saving, the more compound interest can work in your favor. I tried to explain this during one family dinner, Beverly cut me off with a laugh and said, "Oh, Harold, the education landscape is so different now. There are all sorts of new funding options and programs we're looking into." Roger nodded along, even though I could tell from his expression that he had no idea what these new funding options were supposed to be. I used to take the grandkids fishing when they were younger. Sandra would sit quietly on the dock with her sketchbook, drawing the lake while waiting for the fish to bite. Glenn would pepper me with questions about everything: why the fish liked certain bait, how the boat motor worked, what different clouds meant for weather. Those were good times. I'd pack sandwiches and drinks, pick them up Saturday morning, and we'd spend the whole day at Lake Norman. I taught Glenn how to tie knots and read a fish finder. I showed Sandra how to calculate compound interest using her allowance money as an example. But those trips stopped happening around the time Beverly decided the kids were too busy with structured activities. Soccer practice, art classes, tutoring sessions. Every weekend was scheduled down to the hour. "It's just so hard to find time," Beverly would say when I suggested another fishing trip. "The kids have so much going on." What she meant was that unstructured time with Grandpa Harold wasn't as valuable as organized activities she could control and measure. Sitting by a lake talking about life didn't look as good on college applications as specialized camps and competitive sports. I stopped suggesting trips. I figured if they wanted to spend time with me, they'd find a way to make it happen. They didn't. The real turning point came during my 65th birthday. It fell on a Wednesday, not a weekend, so I didn't expect a big celebration, but I figured I'd at least get a phone call from my son. Maybe the grandkids would remember and give me a quick call after school. I waited all day, checked my phone every hour. Looked at the caller ID every time it rang, hoping to see Roger's number or Beverly's nothing. A few telemarketers, one wrong number, but no family. That evening, I sat in my recliner with a cup of coffee and the newspaper trying to pretend it didn't matter. But it did matter. It mattered a lot. The next day, Roger called around lunchtime. "Hey, Dad, sorry I missed your birthday yesterday." Things got crazy with work, and Beverly was dealing with some school thing with Sandra. He sounded genuinely apologetic, but also distracted. I could hear traffic in the background like he was calling from his car between appointments. "No problem," I said. "I know everyone's busy. We should get together soon, though, maybe dinner this weekend." But the weekend came and went without another call. A week later, I got a text message. "Sorry, Dad. Rain check on dinner. Beverly's mom is visiting." That's when I understood what was really happening. I wasn't part of their lives anymore. I was just someone they had to manage occasionally, like an obligation they'd rather forget. The realization didn't make me angry. It made me sad for a while, then determined. I could keep waiting around for scraps of attention, making excuses for why my own family couldn't find 10 minutes to call on my birthday, or I could do something about it. I wasn't ready to spend the rest of my years feeling invisible. That night, something shifted in me. I'd been drifting since Joyce died, going through the motions of retirement without any real purpose. Playing golf occasionally, reading books, watching too much TV, waiting for the phone to ring, but I wasn't dead yet. I had experience, knowledge, and probably 15 to 20 good years left if I stayed healthy. I could either spend those years being a burden people had to remember occasionally, or I could build something that made me valuable again. The next morning, I drove to Best Buy and bought a laptop, not some basic model for checking email and playing solitaire. A good one with a fast processor and a clear screen. If I was going to learn something new, I wanted proper tools. The young salesman couldn't have been more than 25, walked me through the features with barely concealed impatience. He kept using terms I didn't understand and sighing when I asked him to explain. "It's really pretty intuitive," he said. "Most people just figure it out as they go." What he meant was, most people your age should stick to simple things and stop bothering me with questions. I bought the laptop anyway, along with a printer and some software he recommended. $800 total, which seemed like a lot for equipment I wasn't sure I could use, but I'd spent more than that on golf clubs I hardly touched. That evening, I set everything up on Joyce's old sewing table in the spare bedroom. It took me 3 hours to get the printer connected and another hour to figure out the wireless internet. I called the cable company twice and felt like an idiot both times. But by 10 p.m., I was online, reading articles, and watching YouTube videos about starting businesses after retirement. Most of the advice was aimed at younger folks, but I figured the basic principles were the same. I spent the next week researching, taking notes in a spiral notebook like I used to do for insurance seminars. I learned about websites and email marketing and something called social media. A lot of it went over my head, but I kept reading and watching videos. Then I found a forum called Second Chapter Success, older adults sharing stories about starting new careers after retirement, engineers who became YouTube teachers, accountants who offered tax consulting online, former managers who created courses about leadership. These weren't get-rich-quick schemes or people trying to sell me something. They were real folks, mostly men over 60 who had taken their professional experience and found new ways to use it. They shared practical advice about setting up websites, finding customers, and pricing services. Reading their stories gave me an idea. After 42 years in insurance and financial services, I knew things that could help other men going through retirement transitions. How to evaluate insurance needs when you're on a fixed income. Investment strategies for people who couldn't afford big risks. Estate planning basics that didn't require hiring expensive lawyers. Medicare supplement decisions, that was a big one. I'd helped hundreds of clients navigate that maze over the years, and most people approaching 65 were completely lost. The insurance companies made it confusing on purpose with overlapping coverage options and misleading marketing materials. Real practical stuff that nobody explained in plain English until you were already confused and making expensive mistakes. I spent $97 on an online course called Consulting After 50. It was created by a retired engineer from Oregon who'd built a six-figure business helping manufacturing companies solve technical problems. 12 modules covering everything from setting up a website to pricing your services to finding your first clients. I printed out all the materials, 200 pages total, and put them in a 3-ring binder. Call me old-fashioned, but I learn better when I can write notes in the margins and flip back through pages easily. The course was practical, no-nonsense advice from someone who'd actually done what he was teaching. Module 1 was about identifying your expertise and translating it into services people would pay for. Module 2 covered the legal basics, business registration, insurance, taxes. Module 3 was about building credibility when you're starting from zero. I took notes in my spiral notebook, paused videos to write down important points, and completed every exercise. It felt good to be learning again, like my brain was waking up after years of coasting. Within a month, I had registered my business name with the state. Second chapter, financial strategies. I bought the domain name for $12 a year and built a simple website using a template from the course. Nothing fancy, just 3 pages explaining my background, the services I offered, and how to contact me. My first blog post was titled "What Nobody Tells You About Insurance After Retirement." I wrote about real situations I'd seen over the years, people paying for coverage they didn't need, missing important gaps in their protection, getting confused by Medicare supplement options that weren't explained clearly. The post was 800 words of practical advice based on actual experience helping families navigate these decisions. I published it on a Tuesday evening and checked the statistics obsessively for the next week. 47 views the first week, mostly from web crawlers and random search traffic, but it was a start. I kept writing, Medicare supplement myths that cost you money. How to evaluate your 401k rollover options. Estate planning basics for regular folks. Each post shared specific advice based on real situations I'd handled during my career. I wasn't trying to sell anything yet, just sharing useful information. The course had taught me about building trust before trying to make money, so I focused on being helpful first. Slowly, people started reading. My second post got 73 views. The third one hit 156. I got my first comment from a guy in Ohio who said my Medicare article had saved him $200 a month by helping him understand which supplement plan he actually needed. Finally, someone who explains this stuff in plain English, he wrote, "My insurance agent just wanted to sell me the most expensive option." That comment meant more to me than any performance review I'd ever received at Mutual Trust. Someone I'd never met found value in what I knew. Someone's life was a little better because I'd taken the time to share my experience. A widow from Florida emailed to thank me for explaining life insurance options without trying to scare her into buying more coverage than she could afford. A retired teacher from Tennessee said my 401k article helped her understand fees she'd been paying for years without realizing it. Real people with real problems, grateful for straightforward advice from someone who'd been helping families with these exact issues for 4 decades. 3 months in, I had 500 email subscribers, people who'd signed up to get notified when I published new posts. The course had taught me to capture email addresses by offering something valuable in exchange, so I created a simple checklist. 10 questions to ask before buying any insurance policy. 6 months later, I had 1,200 subscribers. These weren't random internet users. They were people actively seeking advice about retirement financial planning. They were commenting on posts, asking questions, sharing their own experiences. The online course instructor had emphasized the importance of understanding your audience, so I started paying attention to what questions came up repeatedly. Medicare confusion was huge. People approaching 65 were overwhelmed by options and terrified of making expensive mistakes. Long-term care planning was another big concern. So was understanding how retirement income affected Social Security benefits. I began offering 30-minute consultations for $75. Simple advice calls where I'd review someone's insurance situation or help them understand their investment options. Nothing complicated, just practical guidance from someone who'd seen these situations thousands of times. The consultations filled up quickly. I was booking 3 or 4 calls a week initially, then 8 to 10. People appreciated talking to someone who explained things in regular language instead of financial jargon, someone who'd answer their questions without immediately trying to sell them products. During this whole period, Beverly continued treating me like I was slowly losing my marbles. When I mentioned I was working on some projects during our brief phone calls, she'd respond with fake enthusiasm. "That's wonderful, Harold. It's so important to stay active and engaged." The tone suggested she thought I was doing crossword puzzles or maybe volunteering at the library to keep myself busy. Roger would ask what I was up to, and I'd say I was doing some consulting work. Beverly would jump in before I could elaborate. "Oh, that's nice. Harold, there are so many opportunities for seniors to share their wisdom these days." She made it sound like I was reading stories to kids at the local elementary school. I didn't correct her. I was building something they didn't understand, and honestly, I was curious to see how far I could take it without them noticing. The truth was, I was enjoying the work more than I'd enjoyed anything since Joyce died. Every consultation where I helped someone save money or avoid a costly mistake reminded me why I'd loved the insurance business in the first place. Not the paperwork or the sales quotas, but the satisfaction of helping people protect what mattered to them. I raised my consultation rate to $125 per session and was still booking more calls than I could handle. People were willing to pay for advice from someone who understood their concerns and could explain options clearly. By the end of my first year, I was averaging $3,000 per month just from consultations. Not life-changing money, but enough to prove that what I knew had real value to people facing retirement transitions. I called it Retirement Insurance Checkup. What to review and when. It was 35 pages of checklists, worksheets, and explanations that walked people through their insurance needs as they transitioned into retirement. Everything from adjusting life insurance coverage to understanding Medicare timing to evaluating long-term care options. I priced it at $47, figuring it was worth more than an hour consultation but accessible enough that people wouldn't hesitate to buy it. The guide covered material that would take me 3-4 consultation calls to explain properly, so the value was definitely there. It sold 89 copies the first month. Not huge money, about $4,200, but it proved people valued what I knew. More importantly, it showed me I could package my knowledge into products that helped people even when I wasn't directly available to talk with them. The buyers were mostly men between 55 and 70 who were either recently retired or approaching retirement. They appreciated having everything laid out in logical order with clear action steps and realistic timelines. No confusing insurance jargon or sales pitches for expensive products they didn't need. I followed up with Medicare Made Simple at $37 and 401 Key Rollover Decision Guide at $67. Each product solved a specific problem I'd seen hundreds of times during my insurance career, and each one found an audience of people who needed exactly that information. By the end of my first year, my email list had grown to 3,000 subscribers. My monthly income was hitting $4,500 to $6,000 between consultations and product sales. Not bad for working 25 hours a week from my kitchen table. The breakthrough came when Retirement Watch, a newsletter with 85,000 subscribers, asked to feature one of my articles. The editor had found my blog and liked my practical approach to explaining complex financial topics. She wanted to republish my piece about common Medicare mistakes, with proper attribution and links back to my website. The feature brought 847 new email subscribers in 1 week and generated over $300 in product sales in 3 days. More importantly, it led to other opportunities I never would have imagined when I started. SmartMoney.com asked me to write a quarterly column about insurance for retirees. AARP's website invited me to contribute guest articles. A financial planning podcast called Money After 50 wanted me for a 3-part series about insurance basics. I started charging $150 for consultations and was booking 10 to 12 per week. I created online courses that were more comprehensive than my simple guides. Retirement Financial Foundations at $19.7 and Insurance Strategies for Fixed Incomes at $247. Both courses included video lessons, downloadable worksheets, and email support. The production quality wasn't Hollywood level, but the content was solid and the teaching was clear. I set up a simple camera in my spare bedroom and recorded 20-minute lessons on different topics, keeping each segment focused on one specific concept. The most successful product turned out to be the Retirement Security Toolkit, a comprehensive package with guides, checklists, video explanations, and templates for $397. It covered everything from Medicare planning to estate planning basics to long-term care insurance evaluation. I was selling 25 to 30 toolkits per month by the end of year 2. People liked having everything in one place, and the price was reasonable compared to hiring a financial planner for multiple consultations. 2.5 years after that forgotten 65th birthday, I was averaging $10,000 to $12,000 per month. I'd helped over 2,000 people make better financial decisions. I had corporate partnerships with 3 insurance companies who paid me to create educational content for their customers. The work was rewarding in ways I hadn't expected. Beyond the income, I was genuinely helping people avoid expensive mistakes and make more informed choices. A retired firefighter in Colorado used my Medicare guide to save $2,400 a year in unnecessary coverage. A widow in North Carolina followed my estate planning checklist and discovered her late husband's life insurance policy included a benefit she didn't know existed. These weren't just numbers on a spreadsheet. They were real people making better decisions because someone took the time to explain their options in language they could understand. And through all of this success, Beverly still thought I was just staying busy in retirement. The family dynamics hadn't changed much during my first 2 years building the business. Phone calls were still infrequent and brief. Invitations to family events were non-existent. When I saw pictures on Roger's social media of birthday parties and graduations and holiday gatherings, I wasn't in any of them. I'd stopped taking it personally, though. I had a purpose again. Work that mattered. People who valued what I knew. The quiet house that used to feel lonely now felt peaceful. I could focus on my clients and subscribers without distractions. Sandra would text me occasionally, usually about school or college applications. She was a senior now, looking at graphic design programs. I'd helped her understand education loans and financial aid options, explaining how to evaluate the return on investment for different degree programs. Glenn had made varsity baseball as a sophomore, which was impressive. He'd call sometimes to talk about his games, but the conversations were always brief. Beverly kept their schedules packed with activities and commitments. Roger would check in every few weeks, asking how I was doing, if I needed anything, whether I was staying healthy. The conversations felt obligatory, like items he was checking off a list. When I mentioned my consulting work, he'd make polite noises and change the subject to something else. I didn't push for more involvement in their lives. I'd learned that trying to force relationships just made everyone uncomfortable. If they wanted me around, they knew how to reach me. But I was planning something that would change the dynamic whether they wanted it or not. The call came on a Tuesday morning in early December. I was working on a new guide about Social Security optimization strategies when Beverly's name lit up on my phone screen. We hadn't talked in 6 months, not since a brief conversation about Sandra's college applications where Beverly had politely dismissed my offer to help with financial aid paperwork. "Hi, Harold," she said, with that cheerful tone she uses when she wants something. "I hope I'm not catching you at a bad time." I was actually in the middle of reviewing client emails, but I paused and gave her my attention. "No, it's fine. What's going on?" Well, Roger and I were talking and we realized it's been way too long since we've all been together. The kids have been asking about Grandpa Harold, and we thought maybe you'd like to join us for Christmas this year. I looked out my kitchen window at the oak tree in my backyard. The branches were bare against the gray December sky. It had been 4 years since they'd invited me to anything beyond a brief birthday lunch or graduation ceremony where I felt more like an observer than family. "That's unexpected," I said. I know, Beverly laughed, but it sounded forced. "We've all been so busy with work and school and activities, but it's time, you know." The kids miss their grandfather, and Roger feels terrible about how long it's been. I wondered what had prompted this sudden interest in family togetherness. Roger's recent promotion at work, maybe, or some guilt about how they'd been treating me, or maybe Sandra had said something about wanting to see me more often. Christmas Eve dinner, then Christmas morning with the kids opening presents, Beverly continued. "It'll be just like old times. Just like old times." That was an interesting way to put it, considering the old times had ended with me leaving their house Christmas morning 4 years ago after being forgotten during gift exchange. "I appreciate the invitation," I said. "Oh, come on, Harold. We really want you there. The kids are excited." I could hear something in her voice that I couldn't quite identify. Desperation wasn't the right word, but there was definitely an agenda behind this call. Beverly never did anything without a reason. "Let me think about it," I said. "What's to think about? It's Christmas with family." That was exactly what I needed to think about. After 4 years of being treated like an inconvenient relative they had to manage occasionally, why the sudden invitation? What had changed? "I'll let you know by Thursday," I said. After hanging up, I sat at my kitchen table with a cup of coffee and considered the possibilities. Maybe Roger had finally grown a backbone and insisted they include me. Maybe Sandra or Glenn had asked about me directly. Maybe Beverly's own parents had said something about how poorly they were treating me. Or maybe they'd heard something about my business success and wanted to find out what I was really doing. Beverly had connections throughout Charlotte's professional community through her corporate training work. If someone had mentioned seeing Harold Brennan quoted in financial articles or featured on retirement planning websites, she might be curious enough to investigate. I decided to accept the invitation, partly because I was genuinely curious about what had prompted it, mostly because I had something to show them. I opened the folder on my computer labeled Q4 Business Summary. The numbers looked solid. October through December projected revenue, $30,000. Year-to-date income, $120,000. Not bad for someone Beverly thought was just staying active in retirement. I printed out a clean summary report, 4 pages with charts showing website traffic growth, email subscriber numbers, product sales data, and consulting revenue. Professional looking, just like the quarterly reports I used to prepare at Mutual Trust Insurance. Then I made another call to my lawyer's office. I'd been working with Tom Patterson for the past 18 months on something special. Legal, strategic, and completely ethical. Tom, it's Harold Brennan. Is everything ready for what we discussed? Absolutely. Both trusts are established and funded. Documentation is complete. The grandchildren's education accounts are active with full contributions. This was money Roger and Beverly had refused when I'd offered it directly 3 years ago. I'd suggested setting up 529 education savings plans for Sandra and Glenn, contributing $15,000 for each child as a starting point. Beverly had convinced Roger they didn't want to be dependent on my help, that they preferred to handle their children's education planning themselves. So I'd gone around them legally and set up irrevocable education trusts instead. Sandra and Glenn would have full access when they turned 18, whether their parents approved or not. $12,500 for each child, invested in conservative growth funds that should be worth significantly more by the time they needed the money for college. And the real estate situation? I asked. Closed last Friday. You now own the condo free and clear. 2 bedrooms, downtown Charlotte, walking distance to the financial district. The deed is in your name only. I'd been renting the same house for 7 years since Joyce died, mainly because I couldn't decide what I wanted to do long-term. But with the business growing and my income stabilizing, it seemed like time to own something again. Something that matched my new lifestyle and gave me more flexibility. The condo cost $185,000 and I'd paid cash. 2 bedrooms, 2 bathrooms, modern kitchen, nice view of the city skyline. Walking distance to restaurants and cultural events, but quiet enough to work from home without distractions. Perfect, I'll pick up the documents tomorrow. Christmas was 2 weeks away. I had consultations scheduled through December 23rd and a newsletter to write for my year-end planning series. But I'd make time for one family gathering. I spent the next week preparing, not just the business summary and legal documents, but thinking through how I wanted to handle the conversation. I wasn't interested in being vindictive or making anyone feel small. I just wanted them to understand who I really was now and what they'd missed while treating me like an irrelevant old man. I also wanted to see how they'd react to success they hadn't expected or contributed to. Would they be genuinely proud of what I'd built, or would they immediately try to find ways to benefit from it? Would Roger finally show some backbone and admit they'd been wrong to exclude me? Or would Beverly find ways to minimize my achievements? The business had taught me a lot about human nature over the past 2.5 years. People reveal their true priorities when money and success enter the picture. Christmas Eve morning, I loaded my car with everything I'd need. 1 overnight bag, my briefcase with the business documents and legal papers, and a small bag of wrapped gifts I'd chosen carefully. Nothing expensive, but thoughtful. A leather portfolio for Sandra's college interviews, baseball memorabilia for Glenn, a signed photo from a former Charlotte Knights player who'd made it to the majors. A nice bottle of bourbon for Roger that I'd picked up from a local distillery. For Beverly, a kitchen gadget I'd seen her mention on Facebook. The gifts weren't really the point, though. I'd learned years ago that thoughtful presents don't guarantee appreciation from people who've already decided you're not important to them. The drive from Charlotte to Roger's house in Matthews took 45 minutes through afternoon traffic. Their neighborhood was one of those newer developments where every house looked like it belonged in a home decorating magazine. Big colonial homes with perfect lawns, 3-car garages, and sidewalks where nobody actually walked. Roger's medical equipment sales job paid well, around $85,000 a year plus bonuses. Beverly's corporate training business brought in decent money too, maybe $60,000 annually. Combined with Charlotte's relatively reasonable cost of living, they were comfortable. Upper middle class with all the trappings, nice cars, private school for the kids, annual vacations to beach resorts. But comfortable wasn't wealthy, and they had the same financial pressures as most families their age. Mortgage payments, car loans, college looming for Sandra, Glenn's travel baseball expenses. The kind of ongoing costs that made it hard to save significant money for future goals. I parked behind Roger's BMW in their circular driveway and grabbed my bags from the trunk. The house was decorated for Christmas with the kind of precision that suggested Beverly had either done it herself or hired professionals. Matching wreaths on every window, lights perfectly spaced along the roofline, a large evergreen garland around the front door. Beverly answered the doorbell wearing a red cashmere sweater and black dress pants, looking like she'd stepped out of a Christmas catalog. Her smile was bright and welcoming, but it didn't quite reach her eyes. "Harold, so glad you made it." She leaned in for a quick hug that barely made contact. "How was the drive?" "Fine. Traffic wasn't too bad." She stepped back and gestured me inside with the kind of enthusiasm people use when they're trying too hard to seem happy. Come in, come in." Roger's in the kitchen finishing up dinner preparations. The house smelled like cinnamon and pine needles. Everything was perfectly decorated, matching ornaments on a flawless tree, garland along the staircase banister, twinkling lights in every window. It looked like something from a magazine spread about Christmas entertaining. The living room was immaculate, cream-colored furniture arranged just so. Coffee table books, positioned at precise angles, not a single item out of place. Even the throw pillows looked like they'd been fluffed and positioned by a professional stylist. Roger came around the corner from the kitchen, dish towel in one hand and phone in the other, still typing something as he walked. He looked up long enough to give me a one-armed hug. "Hey, Dad, good to see you." He finished whatever he was typing and finally put the phone in his pocket. "Glad you could make it down. Thanks for inviting me." Sandra and Glenn were in the family room, both staring at tablets while some Christmas movie played on the large TV. Sandra looked up long enough to say hi, Grandpa, before going back to whatever was more interesting on her screen. Glenn managed a wave without lifting his eyes from his game. I remembered when they were younger, how excited they'd get when I visited. Sandra would drag me to her room to show me drawings and stories she'd written. Glenn would want to play catch in the backyard or have me help him with math homework. Now they were teenagers with their own lives, and I was just another adult they had to acknowledge politely. Beverly led me upstairs to the guest room, chatting about dinner plans and tomorrow's schedule. The guest room was small and clearly not used often. The bedding was clean but faded, floral patterns that belonged in someone's guest room circa 1995. The dresser had a fine layer of dust on top, and the ceiling light flickered when Beverly switched it on. "If you need anything, just let us know," she said, already backing toward the door. "Dinner's at 6, so you have time to get settled." I unpacked my overnight bag, hanging my clothes in the small closet and setting my toiletries on the bathroom counter. I placed the wrapped gifts on the dresser and put my briefcase on the chair by the window. Looking around the room, I couldn't help but notice the contrast with the downstairs decorating. Up here, in the space where guests sleep, the furnishings were clearly an afterthought, functional but not welcoming. It felt like a statement about how they viewed people who stayed overnight, tolerated but not really important enough to impress. I sat on the edge of the bed and looked out the window at their backyard. Perfect lawn, professional landscaping, outdoor furniture that probably cost more than most people spent on their living room sets. Everything designed to project success and good taste to neighbors and visitors. Downstairs, I could hear Beverly directing some kind of dinner preparation while Roger presumably followed instructions. The sounds of a family getting ready for Christmas Eve dinner, everything timed and choreographed for maximum holiday atmosphere. I wondered again what had prompted this sudden invitation. In 4 years, they'd managed to celebrate every holiday, birthday, and special occasion without me. What had changed that made my presence suddenly desirable? Maybe I'd find out at dinner. Or maybe I'd just enjoy the evening and reveal my own surprises tomorrow morning when they least expected them. I opened my briefcase and looked at the documents inside: business summary, trust paperwork, condo deed, bank statements. Evidence of a life they knew nothing about, success they hadn't anticipated, decisions they hadn't been consulted on. Tomorrow was going to be interesting. Dinner was prime rib with all the trimmings, served in their formal dining room on china that probably came out twice a year. Beverly had gone all out, multiple courses, cloth napkins, crystal glasses, the works. The table was set for 6, with place cards written in Beverly's careful handwriting. My seat was at the far end of the table between Glenn and the kitchen door, close enough to participate in conversation but positioned like someone who might need to help clear dishes or fetch forgotten items from the kitchen. The subtle message was clear. I was family, but not quite equal family. Beverly dominated the dinner conversation, as usual. She talked about her company's record year, how they'd landed 3 major corporate clients and expanded their team by 4 trainers. The consulting business was growing faster than expected, with contracts booked solid through the next quarter. "It's been amazing," she said. Cutting her prime rib with precise movements. We're actually turning away business because we can't handle any more clients right now. Roger jumped in with updates about his own work. He'd picked up a new territory covering South Carolina in addition to North Carolina, which meant more travel but significantly higher commission potential. There was talk of a promotion to regional manager if his numbers stayed strong. The medical equipment industry is really evolving, he said. Hospitals are investing in technology upgrades, and our products are perfectly positioned for that market shift. Sandra talked about her college applications, specifically the graphic design program she was most interested in. She'd applied to 8 schools ranging from affordable state universities to expensive private art colleges. Her portfolio was strong, and she'd already heard positive feedback from a few admissions counselors. Glenn shared updates about making varsity baseball as a sophomore, which was impressive for a kid his age. He talked about the travel team he'd joined and the showcases he'd be attending next summer to get college scouts' attention. All good stuff. Normal family conversation about work achievements and future plans, but nobody asked what I'd been up to beyond the polite, "How are you doing, Harold?" when I first sat down. About halfway through dinner, during a lull in conversation, Beverly looked over at me with that bright smile she uses when she remembers she's supposed to include everyone. "Harold, you're being awfully quiet tonight. How have you been spending your time lately? Still enjoying retirement?" The way she said enjoying retirement made it sound like an extended vacation where the biggest decision was which golf course to play or which television shows to watch. "I stay busy," I said, cutting another piece of prime rib, "consulting work mostly." "That's wonderful," Beverly replied with enthusiasm that sounded rehearsed. "I think it's so important for people your age to stay engaged." "What kind of consulting do you do?" Roger looked up from his plate, mildly interested. This was probably the first time in years anyone had asked for details about my work instead of just making polite noises and changing the subject. "Insurance and financial planning advice," I said, "helping people understand their options as they transition into retirement." Beverly nodded like she was genuinely interested. "Oh, that sounds really meaningful. Are you volunteering with a senior center or working with some kind of nonprofit organization?" There it was. The automatic assumption that anything I was doing had to be volunteer work or hobby-level activity. The idea that I might be running an actual business, earning real money, or building something significant was apparently outside the realm of possibility. "Not exactly," I said. "Well, however you're doing it, I'm sure it's very rewarding," she continued. "Giving back to the community is so important, especially for people who have the time and experience to help others." Roger nodded in agreement. "That's great, Dad. Good way to use your background." Neither of them asked for specific details about what I was actually doing, how many people I was helping, or whether the work was financially worthwhile. They'd already categorized it as charitable activity by a retired person looking for ways to feel useful. The conversation moved on to other topics. Beverly's plans for redecorating their master bedroom, Roger's golf game and his goals for lowering his handicap, Sandra's excitement about potentially studying in California, Glenn's hopes for making all-conference team next season. I listened and made appropriate comments, but I was mainly observing the family dynamic. Beverly clearly ran the household and made most of the decisions. Roger deferred to her judgment on everything from vacation planning to the kids' activities. Sandra and Glenn were polite, but not particularly engaged with the adult conversation. It was a pleasant enough evening. Good food, comfortable setting, normal family interaction. But I felt like an observer rather than a participant, someone who'd been invited to watch their lives rather than be part of them. After dinner, we moved to the living room. Beverly served coffee and Christmas cookies while Roger built up the fire in the fireplace. The kids disappeared upstairs, presumably to their rooms and their screens. "So Dad," Roger said, settling into his leather recliner with a cup of coffee, "tell us more about this consulting work you're doing." Finally, a direct question that suggested actual interest rather than polite obligation. "Insurance and financial planning guidance for people approaching retirement," I said, "helping them understand Medicare options, evaluate their coverage needs, make decisions about 401k rollovers." Beverly perked up. "That does sound interesting. How did you get started with that?" "Started a blog a couple years ago, sharing practical advice based on my experience at Mutual Trust. It grew from there." "A blog?" Beverly looked genuinely surprised. "Harold, I had no idea you were so tech-savvy. I learned," I said simply. Roger leaned forward. "Are you making any money from it, or is it mainly just for the satisfaction of helping people?" And there was the question I'd been waiting for. The assumption that any business I'd built couldn't possibly be financially significant. "A little of both," I said, taking a sip of my coffee. I could have elaborated. I could have mentioned the 15,000 email subscribers, the corporate partnerships, the monthly income that exceeded what most people their age were earning. But I decided to wait until tomorrow. Christmas morning would be more interesting if they had no idea what was coming. Christmas morning started early, as it always does when there are teenagers in the house excited about presents. I woke up at 6:30 to the sounds of footsteps in the hallway and muffled conversations downstairs. By the time I showered, dressed, and made it to the kitchen, Beverly already had coffee brewing and was pulling a breakfast casserole out of the oven. "Good morning, Harold. Did you sleep well?" She was wearing a green sweater with tiny reindeer on it and looked like she'd been up for hours getting everything ready. "Fine, thanks. Can I help with anything?" "Oh no, I've got it all under control. Just sit and relax." She waved me toward the breakfast table where Roger was already sitting with his coffee and phone, scrolling through what looked like work emails even on Christmas morning. The breakfast casserole was excellent layers of bread, eggs, cheese, and sausage that had obviously been assembled the night before and baked this morning. Beverly had also made fresh fruit salad and some kind of coffee cake with a streusel topping. Everything was perfectly prepared and presented, like she was hosting a magazine photo shoot instead of a family breakfast. Sandra and Glenn appeared around 8, both still in pajamas, but clearly eager to get to the living room. Sandra had her hair pulled back in a messy bun and was wearing Christmas-themed flannel pants with an oversized college sweatshirt. Glenn was in basketball shorts and a t-shirt from his summer baseball camp. "Can we open presents now?" Glenn asked before he'd even sat down. After breakfast, Beverly said firmly, "We're doing this properly." But breakfast was rushed despite her insistence on doing things properly. Everyone ate quickly, making small talk about the weather and plans for later in the day. I could tell the kids were antsy to get to the gift exchange, and even the adults seemed eager to move things along. By 8:45, we were all gathered in the living room. The Christmas tree dominated one corner, a perfectly shaped Fraser fir decorated in silver and white with coordinated ornaments that looked like they'd been purchased as a set. Dozens of gifts were arranged underneath, carefully wrapped in matching paper and tied with elaborate bows. Beverly had obviously put a lot of effort into the presentation. Each gift had a calligraphy name tag, and the packages were arranged by size and recipient in a way that looked almost artistic. It was beautiful, but it felt more like a department store display than a family Christmas tree. "Okay, kids, you can start," Beverly said, settling into her spot on the couch with her coffee cup and phone ready to take pictures. Sandra and Glenn dove in with the enthusiasm that only teenagers can manage on Christmas morning. Wrapping paper flew everywhere as they tore into packages, exclaiming over each gift and holding things up for photos. Sandra got a new MacBook Pro for her graphic design work, a top-of-the-line model that probably cost more than $2,000. She also received a complete set of professional art supplies, some expensive jeans she'd been wanting, and a gift card to her favorite bookstore. Glenn's haul was equally impressive. New baseball gear, including a Louisville Slugger bat that cost at least $400, wireless headphones, the latest gaming console, and some clothing brands that I knew were popular with his age group. Roger and Beverly exchanged gifts next. He gave her diamond earrings in a small blue box that she opened with appropriate surprise and delight. She'd gotten him a new golf bag and a smart watch that synced with his phone to track fitness goals and business appointments. They smiled for pictures, hugged and kissed, and made all the appropriate sounds about loving their gifts and being surprised by the thoughtfulness. It was a well-choreographed performance of Christmas morning happiness. I sat in the armchair in the corner, sipping coffee and smiling when someone looked my way. The gifts I'd brought were still under the tree, but nobody had opened them yet. The kids were too absorbed in their new technology to notice, and the adults seemed to be managing the flow of gift opening in a way that saved certain presents for later. Then Beverly looked around at the sea of wrapping paper and empty boxes with an expression of sudden concern. "Wait a minute," she said, pressing her hand to her forehead. "Did we miss anyone?" She scanned the room like she was taking inventory, her eyes stopping on me sitting quietly in my corner chair. Roger cleared his throat and looked down at his coffee mug. Sandra glanced at me, then looked away quickly. Glenn was already absorbed in setting up his new gaming system. "Oh my goodness, Harold," Beverly said with a laugh that sounded forced. "I'm so embarrassed. With everything going on yesterday, cooking and getting ready and managing all the details, I completely forgot to pick up anything for you." She shook her head like she couldn't believe her own oversight. "The holidays are just so crazy busy, and I had such a long list of people to shop for. I can't believe I missed you." She said it like forgetting your father-in-law at Christmas was just one of those silly mistakes that happens when you're juggling too many responsibilities. An innocent oversight that anyone could understand. I nodded and took another sip of coffee. "No worries." Glenn looked up from his game controller with a grin. "Don't worry about it, Grandpa. You're used to being forgotten anyway." The room went quiet for a moment. Roger's face reddened slightly, and he said, "Glenn, that's not appropriate." But nobody corrected what he'd said because it was true. I was used to it. Beverly forced a laugh. "Kids say the darndest things, right?" Sandra was staring at her new laptop screen, pretending to be absorbed in setting it up. Roger was studying his new watch like it had complicated features that required immediate attention. I sat there for another minute, watching them settle back into their new gifts, listening to the excited chatter about software and games and battery life. Then I reached down and picked up my briefcase from beside the chair. Actually, I said, I got myself something this year, thought I'd share it with everyone. The room got quieter. Beverly tilted her head with that polite smile she uses when she thinks someone's about to say something boring. Roger looked curious but distracted, probably wondering if this was going to take long. Sandra glanced up from her new laptop, and Glenn paused his game setup. I opened the briefcase and pulled out the business summary. 4 pages, printed on good paper, bound with a simple black clip. Nothing fancy, just facts and numbers organized the way I used to present quarterly reports at Mutual Trust Insurance. You know that consulting work I mentioned last night? I said, setting the papers on the coffee table among the scattered wrapping paper. It's grown into something bigger than I expected. Roger leaned forward and picked up the summary, his expression shifting from polite interest to genuine curiosity as he read the cover page. Second chapter, Financial Strategies, I continued. I help retirees navigate insurance and investment decisions. Started as a simple blog about Medicare and Social Security, but it's developed into a full consulting business. Beverly moved closer to read over Roger's shoulder, her smile becoming more fixed as she scanned the first page. Currently 15,000 email subscribers, I said. The website gets about 25,000 visitors per month, mostly men between 55 and 70 dealing with retirement transitions, but some younger folks planning ahead. Roger's eyes widened as he read the subscriber numbers and website traffic statistics. Dad, these numbers are growing steadily for the past 2.5 years. I finished. I offer individual consultations, create digital courses about retirement planning, and write educational content for corporate clients. Beverly was reading more carefully now, her polite expression fading into something I couldn't quite identify. Confusion, maybe, or surprise that bordered on disbelief. I charge $150 for 1-hour consultations. I continued, usually book 10 to 12 per week. I've also developed online courses about Medicare planning, 401k rollovers, and insurance strategies for people on fixed incomes. Sandra looked up from her laptop. Wait, Grandpa, people pay you for advice? About $120,000 this year, I said. After business expenses, the room went completely silent. Even Glenn stopped fiddling with his gaming console and looked up. Beverly straightened up, her face a mix of surprise and something that might have been embarrassment. Harold, I had no idea it was. I mean, we thought you were just what? I asked gently. She didn't finish the sentence, but I knew what she'd been about to say. They thought I was just keeping busy with volunteer work or hobby projects. Something to fill time and make me feel useful without actually being productive or profitable. Roger was still staring at the financial summary page. Dad, this says your quarterly revenue was $30,000. That's more than I make in some quarters. I nodded. Fourth quarter is usually strong because people start thinking about their taxes and next year's insurance decisions. Beverly found her voice again. But how did you learn to do all this online marketing and website stuff? Same way I learned everything else in my career, I said. One step at a time. Took some courses, joined some forums, practiced until I figured it out. I reached into the briefcase again and pulled out a smaller envelope. I also got myself an early Christmas present. Roger looked up from the business papers. What's that? I opened the envelope and held up a set of keys. Bought a condo downtown Charlotte, 2 bedrooms, nice view of the city, walking distance to everything I need. Closed on it 3 weeks ago. Beverly's mouth opened slightly, but no words came out. Paid cash, I added $185,000. Seemed like time to own something again instead of renting. Sandra was grinning. Grandpa, that's amazing. You bought your own place? Glenn looked impressed for the first time all morning. You just bought a whole condo? I smiled at both of them. Figured I earned it. Roger ran his hand through his hair, a habit he'd had since he was little when he was trying to process unexpected information. Why didn't you tell us about any of this? I looked around the room at the expensive gifts under the tree, at Beverly's carefully coordinated Christmas decorations, at the evidence of a family that had plenty of money for the things they wanted. When would I have told you, I asked, during our phone calls that happen every few months, at the family gatherings I don't get invited to? Roger's face reddened. Dad, that's not. Besides, I interrupted gently. You never asked. Every time I mentioned my consulting work, the conversation moved on to other things. You both decided I was just keeping busy, and I let you think that. Beverly was staring at the condo keys. Harold, I don't understand. If you've been doing so well financially, why didn't you say something? Why keep it secret? It wasn't secret, I said. It just wasn't interesting to anyone in this family. When I told you I was working on projects, you smiled and changed the subject. When I said I was doing consulting, you assumed it was volunteer work. I reached into the briefcase one more time and pulled out another envelope, this one thicker than the first. There's something else, I said. Something I set up 18 months ago that I think you should know about. Beverly looked like she was bracing herself for another surprise. What now? Education trusts for Sandra and Glenn. $12,500 each invested in conservative growth funds. They'll have access when they turn 18. Sandra's eyes went wide. You set up college funds for us? Glenn put down his controller completely. Seriously, I nodded. Should be worth quite a bit more by the time you need it for tuition. You can use it for any accredited educational program, college, trade school, art school, whatever direction you choose. Roger was staring at me like I'd grown a second head. But we told you 3 years ago that we didn't need help with college planning. You told me you didn't want my help. I corrected. So I found a way to help my grandchildren directly. Beverly looked like she'd been hit with a bucket of cold water. Harold, you had no right to do that without discussing it with us first. I tried to discuss it, I said calmly. 3 years ago, you told Roger you didn't want to be dependent on my help. Remember that conversation? Roger was nodding slowly, obviously remembering. We said we wanted to handle the kids' college planning ourselves, right? And how's that going? Roger looked uncomfortable. We've been meaning to set something up. Roger, I said gently, Sandra's going to be a senior next year. College applications are due in less than 12 months. Glenn's got 2 years after that. If you were going to set something up, you would have done it by now. Beverly's voice was tight. We're perfectly capable of paying for our children's education. I'm sure you are. But now you don't have to worry about the first $50,000 or so for each kid. The money's already there, earning interest, waiting for them. Sandra was reading over the trust paperwork. This says I can use the money for any accredited educational program. College, trade school, art school, graduate programs, professional certifications. I confirmed. Whatever direction you choose. Glenn looked excited. Even if I wanted to go to one of those baseball academies, if it's a legitimate educational program with accredited courses, yes. Roger was shaking his head slowly. Dad, I don't know what to say. This is also unexpected, is it? I asked. I've been the same person all along. Same experience, same knowledge, same desire to help my family succeed. The only thing that's changed is that now you know other people value what I have to offer. I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at their perfect neighborhood with its perfect lawns and perfect spacing between houses. You know what hurt the most? I said, turning back to face them. It wasn't being forgotten on my birthday, or not getting invited to family gatherings, or being treated like an obligation you had to manage occasionally. The room was quiet. Sandra had stopped looking at her laptop. Glenn had put down his game controller completely. What hurt was being treated like my 42 years of experience didn't matter anymore. Like everything I learned about insurance and investments and financial planning was suddenly worthless because I retired. Beverly was sitting very still, her hands folded in her lap. When Sandra asked about college savings plans 2 years ago, I tried to offer advice. Beverly, you told her I was behind the times on investment options. When Glenn needed help understanding compound interest for a school project, you said the math might be too confusing, the way I explained it. I looked at both kids. Do you remember those conversations? Sandra nodded. I remember asking about college savings. I wanted to hear what you thought, but Mom said you might give me outdated information. Glenn was nodding too, and I asked about that math project. You were going to show me how interest works with real examples. But Mom said the teacher wanted us to use the textbook method. Beverly's face was flushed. I didn't mean it like that, maybe not. I said, but that's how it felt. Every time I tried to share what I knew, I got redirected. Not rudely, just efficiently. Like my knowledge had an expiration date. I sat back down and picked up the business summary again, so I stopped trying to be part of your financial decisions. Instead, I started helping other people's families make better choices. Roger was reading through the corporate partnership section. Dad, it says here you're working with Prudential and New York Life. Educational content creation, I confirmed. They pay me to explain their products in plain English for their older customers. Turns out my old-fashioned approach is exactly what people want. I pointed to another section of the report. I also do monthly webinars for AARP's financial education program. Same thing, practical advice without the sales pressure. Beverly was staring at the trust documents like she was trying to make sense of a foreign language. These trust funds are real? Call my lawyer if you want verification, I said. Tom Patterson, downtown Charlotte. He'll confirm everything. Roger looked up from the papers. This is really happening. You're actually making this kind of money from consulting? Yes. And you own a condo downtown? Yes. And you set up college funds for the kids without telling us? I told you, you said no. So I went around you, legally and ethically. He sat back in his chair, still processing. I feel like I don't know you anymore. You don't, I said. The man you think you know sits around feeling sorry for himself, waiting for his family to remember he exists. The real me decided to build something instead. Sandra was still reading through the trust paperwork. Grandpa, this is incredible. Thank you, Glenn was grinning. This is like the best Christmas present ever, better than the gaming system. Beverly finally found her voice again. Harold, this is all very impressive, but I hope you're being careful. There are a lot of scams targeting seniors online. Are you sure these people you're working with are legitimate? I looked at her for a long moment. Even now, even with the evidence right in front of her, she was suggesting I might be getting taken advantage of. Beverly, I said gently, I'm not some confused old man who fell for a Nigerian prince email. I'm a licensed insurance professional with 42 years of experience who built a legitimate business helping people make informed financial decisions. I pulled out my phone and opened the banking app. Here's last month's deposit summary. Here are the tax documents from my CPA. Here's my business license from the state of North Carolina. Roger leaned over to look at the phone screen. His eyes widened. This is real money. Dad, you're making more than I am some months. I put the phone away. It's not about the money, Roger. It's about purpose. It's about being useful instead of ornamental. Sandra had been quiet for a while, but now she spoke up. Grandpa, can I ask you something? Sure. Why didn't you just tell us? I mean, if you were doing so well, why keep it secret? It was a fair question. I thought about how to answer it honestly. A couple of reasons, I said. First, you never really asked when I said I was doing consulting work. The conversation always moved on immediately. Nobody was curious about the details. I looked around the room, but honestly, the main reason is that I wanted to see how you'd treat me if you thought I had nothing special to offer. If you thought I was just getting older and less relevant. Roger shifted uncomfortably in his chair. That's not how we see you, Dad. Isn't it? I asked. When's the last time you asked for my advice about anything important? When's the last time you included me in a family decision? When's the last time anyone in this room acted like my opinion mattered? Nobody answered immediately. I spent 2.5 years building something that helps thousands of people make better financial decisions. I've saved families tens of thousands of dollars in unnecessary fees and bad insurance choices. I've helped people protect their retirement savings and plan for healthcare costs they didn't see coming. I gestured toward the business summary, but until 30 minutes ago, you all thought I was just playing around online to keep busy. Glenn spoke up, surprising everyone. I didn't know you were so smart about this stuff, Grandpa. I smiled at him. I've been smart about it for longer than you've been alive, buddy. I just haven't had anyone in this family ask my opinion about it in a very long time. Beverly was still looking at the trust documents, her expression difficult to read. Harold, I appreciate what you've done for the children, but we really should have discussed this first. We did discuss it, I said. 3 years ago. You said no. We said we wanted to handle their college planning ourselves, right? And how's that working out? The silence stretched uncomfortably. Roger finally cleared his throat. We've been meaning to set something up. It's just been hard to find the time to research all the options. Roger, I said gently, I offered to help you research those options. I offered to explain the different types of education savings accounts, the tax advantages, the contribution limits. Beverly said you had it handled. Beverly's voice was defensive. We do have it handled. We're perfectly capable of paying for our children's education. I'm sure you are. But the reality is that college costs have gone up 25% in the past 5 years. Sandra's looking at art schools that cost $45,000 a year. Glenn wants to play college baseball, which means he'll need academic scholarships because athletic money is limited. I pulled out a calculator app on my phone. 4 years at Sandra's first choice school will cost about $200,000 total. Glenn's looking at similar numbers. Even if you both keep getting raises and bonuses, that's a significant financial challenge. Roger was nodding. We've talked about taking out parent loans, which will cost you another $40,000 in interest over 10 years, I said. The trust funds eliminate at least the first 2 years of expenses for each kid. No loans, no interest, no monthly payments hanging over your heads for the next decade. Sandra was looking back and forth between her parents and me. Mom, Dad, this is actually really helpful. Why are you acting like it's a problem? Beverly struggled to find words. It's not a problem, honey. It's just... We like to make our own decisions about family finances, but you weren't making decisions, Sandra pointed out. You were just talking about making decisions someday. Glenn nodded. Yeah, every time I asked about college money, you said we'd figure it out later. Roger looked embarrassed. We were planning to sit down after the holidays and start looking at options. After the holidays, I repeated, Sandra's a junior, Roger. Application deadlines are in 8 months. You're running out of time to make informed choices. I stood up and walked to the window again, looking out at their neighborhood. Everything was perfectly maintained, perfectly planned, perfectly executed. But sometimes perfect planning meant never actually starting. Look, I said, turning back to them, I didn't do this to embarrass you or prove a point. I did it because I love my grandchildren and I had the knowledge and resources to help them. Beverly was quiet, but I could see her processing everything. For 42 years, I helped people plan for their family's financial futures. I know what college costs, I know how education savings accounts work, and I know what happens when families wait too long to start planning. I sat back down. When you told me you didn't want my help, I respected that decision. But I also wasn't going to let my grandchildren suffer because their parents were too proud to accept advice from someone they thought was past his prime. Sandra looked at her parents. I think what Grandpa did is amazing. Now I can apply to the schools I really want without worrying about whether we can afford them. Glenn was nodding, and I don't have to stress about whether playing baseball is worth the money. The money's already there. Roger ran his hand through his hair again. Dad, I appreciate what you've done. I really do. It's just this is all so unexpected. What's unexpected? I asked. That I still have valuable knowledge? That I can learn new skills? That I care about my grandchildren's futures? No, that's not what I meant. Then what did you mean? He struggled to find the right words. I guess I didn't realize you were still so capable of building something like this. There it was, the truth finally out in the open. You didn't think I was capable. I said, you thought I was too old, too out of touch, too set in my ways to learn anything new or build anything meaningful. Roger looked down at his hands. It's not that we thought you couldn't do things, it's just what? Beverly jumped in. Harold, you have to understand. The business world has changed so much in the past few years. Digital marketing, social media, online platforms, it's all very different from traditional insurance sales. Different how? I asked. Well, the technology, the target audiences, the marketing strategies, it requires a completely different skill set. I smiled. Beverly, what do you think I've been doing for the past 2.5 years? She didn't have an answer for that. I learned the technology. I figured out the target audiences, I developed marketing strategies that work, and I did it all while you were assuming I was too old to understand how the modern world operates. The room was quiet again. Sandra was still reading through the business documents. Glenn was actually paying attention to an adult conversation for once. The funny thing is, I continued, my success came from exactly the opposite approach. Instead of trying to be modern and trendy and digital first, I offered something most online businesses don't. Genuine expertise based on decades of real experience. I picked up the trust documents. People don't want flashy marketing and complicated strategies. They want someone who's actually helped thousands of families navigate these decisions before. Someone who can explain things in plain English without trying to sell them products they don't need. Roger was reading through the corporate partnership agreements. Dad, these companies are paying you serious money for content creation because they've figured out what my own family couldn't see, I said. That experience and knowledge don't become obsolete just because someone retires. If anything, they become more valuable because they're harder to find. Beverly was looking at me differently now, like she was seeing someone she hadn't noticed before. After a few moments, she spoke up. Harold, what you've built is really impressive. Truly remarkable for someone starting at your age. Thank you. I mean, building something like this from scratch, learning all the technology, developing a client base, it's rare and inspiring. I raised an eyebrow but stayed quiet. You know, she continued, with what you've already established, there might be opportunities to expand significantly. Scale what you're doing to reach more people. Roger was nodding along. Dad, maybe we could help somehow. Beverly knows marketing and corporate training. I understand sales processes and client management. Beverly smiled, the first genuine seeming smile I'd seen from her all morning. We could probably help you grow this into something much bigger. With our professional networks and your expertise, the potential is really exciting. Grow it into what? I asked. A real business, Beverly said. I mean, what you have is great for a retirement project, but we could help you scale it. Bring in bigger corporate clients, develop more sophisticated marketing campaigns, maybe even bring on other consultants to expand the service offerings. Roger was getting excited. We could help you systematize everything, create standardized processes, develop team structures, maybe even look at franchising opportunities. I looked at both of them. For 4 years, they'd barely acknowledged my existence. This morning, they'd forgotten to get me a Christmas gift. But now that they saw dollar signs, suddenly they wanted to be business partners. You want to help me scale my business? I said exactly. Beverly said, what you've done on your own is impressive, but imagine what we could do together. We could probably double or triple your revenue within a year. Triple it. Roger nodded enthusiastically. With Beverly's corporate connections and my sales experience, Plus your knowledge base, we could build something really significant. I sat back in my chair and looked around the living room, at the expensive gifts under the tree, at the perfect decorations and coordinated color schemes, at the evidence of a family that had plenty of money but always wanted more. Let me make sure I understand this, I said. For the past 4 years, you've treated me like I was becoming irrelevant. You've excluded me from family decisions, ignored my advice, and made me feel like a burden you had to manage occasionally. They both started to protest, but I held up my hand this morning. You forgot to get me a Christmas gift. Glenn laughed and said I was used to being forgotten. Nobody corrected him because it was true. I looked directly at Beverly. You've spent years suggesting that my knowledge was outdated, that my advice was too old-fashioned, that my opinions weren't worth considering. She opened her mouth to respond, but I continued. But now that you see I'm making $120,000 a year helping other people's families, suddenly you want to be business partners? Roger looked uncomfortable. It's not like that, Dad. What's it like then? He struggled for words. We want to be more involved in your life. Now that my life is profitable, I said. That's not fair, Beverly protested. Isn't it? If I had handed you a plate of homemade cookies this morning instead of a business report, would we be talking about partnerships right now? Nobody answered. Here's the thing, I said, standing up. What I've built isn't just a business, it's personal. It grew out of the quiet moments you didn't see. It came from the loneliness you didn't ask about. I picked up my briefcase. I built this because I needed purpose, not just income. I needed to feel useful, not just busy. I needed to help people who actually wanted my help. Sandra was watching this exchange with obvious interest. Glenn had put down his controller completely. So no, I said, I'm not interested in scaling or systematizing or franchising. I'm not looking for business partners who suddenly discovered my value when they saw my bank account. Beverly looked stunned. Harold, I think you're misunderstanding our intentions. We're not trying to take advantage of your success. We genuinely want to help. Help with what? I asked. Help you grow what you've built. Expand your reach. Make an even bigger impact. My impact is fine, I said. I'm helping the people who need help, making enough money to live comfortably and doing work that matters to me. Why would I want to change that? Roger tried a different approach. Dad, we're family. We should be working together, supporting each other. We should be, I agreed. But supporting each other means being there during the building phase, not just showing up when there's something to benefit from. I walked over to where my overnight bag was sitting by the front door. I'm gonna head home this afternoon. Beverly looked panicked. But we planned for you to stay through tomorrow. We were going to have a nice quiet day, just family time. I appreciate the thought, but I've got work to do. I have a newsletter to write for my subscribers and 3 consultation calls scheduled for Monday. People are counting on me. It was true, but it wasn't the whole truth. The real reason I wanted to leave was that I'd accomplished what I came here to do. I'd shown them who I really was now, and I'd seen exactly how they'd react to success they hadn't expected or contributed to. Roger stood up. Dad, wait. Can we talk about this? I mean, maybe we got off on the wrong foot, but this doesn't have to change our relationship. Roger, this changes everything about our relationship. It has to. Why? Because now you know who I really am, and I know who you really are too. Sandra had been quiet during this whole exchange, but now she spoke up. Grandpa, can I ask you something? Of course. Could I maybe come visit you sometime? In your new condo, I'd love to see how you built your website and learn more about what you do. I smiled, the first genuine smile I'd felt all morning. I'd love that, Sandra. You can come whenever you want. Glenn looked up from his gaming system. Could you maybe teach me about investing, like how to make money grow? If you're really interested, absolutely. We could start with some basic concepts and see how much you want to learn. Beverly was watching this exchange with an expression I couldn't quite read. Concern maybe, or fear that she was losing control of something. Harold, she said carefully, I hope you know we never meant to make you feel excluded from the family. I know you didn't mean to, I said, but intentions and results are 2 different things. Roger ran his hands through his hair. So what happens now? Where do we go from here? Now, I said, you know that I'm not just filling time in retirement. You know that other people value my expertise. You know that I'm financially independent and capable of making my own decisions. I picked up my briefcase. What you do with that information is up to you. Dad, this doesn't have to be the end of anything, Roger said. We can rebuild, start over, do better, can we? I asked. Because nothing's really changed, except your perception of my bank account. I'm still the same person with the same knowledge and the same desire to be part of my family's lives. The only difference is that now you know other people pay me for advice you've been dismissing for years. Beverly was fidgeting with her coffee cup. Maybe we made some mistakes in how we approached things, but families work through these kinds of misunderstandings all the time. These weren't misunderstandings, I said. These were choices. You chose to exclude me from family decisions. You chose to dismiss my advice. You chose to treat me like my opinions didn't matter. I walked toward the stairs. I'm gonna pack my things. Sandra jumped up. Grandpa, wait. Before you go, could you give me your phone number, your real number, not just the family group text? I smiled and pulled out my phone. Of course. And my email address, too. You can reach me anytime. We exchanged contact information while Beverly and Roger watched. Glenn asked for my number too, saying he wanted to text me about baseball and maybe ask questions about money stuff. As I headed upstairs to pack, I could hear Beverly and Roger having an intense whispered conversation in the living room. I couldn't make out the words, but the tone was definitely urgent. They were probably trying to figure out how to salvage the situation, how to repair relationships they'd only just realized were damaged. In the guest room, I packed my overnight bag and gathered the business documents. Looking around the room one last time, I noticed again how different it felt from the perfectly decorated spaces downstairs. This was where they put people they had to accommodate, but didn't really want to impress. I sat on the edge of the bed and thought about the past 2.5 years. The quiet mornings building my business, the satisfaction of helping people make better financial decisions. The growing confidence that came from being valued for my knowledge rather than tolerated despite my age. None of that was going away when I left here today. I'd built something real and meaningful, something that belonged to me. Whether my family chose to be part of my life going forward was their decision to make, but I wasn't going to spend any more time waiting for their approval or trying to prove my worth to people who'd already decided I didn't have any. I had work to do, people to help, and a life to live, with or without them. When I came back downstairs with my bag, the whole family was gathered in the living room. They looked like they'd been having a serious family meeting while I was upstairs. Beverly's expression was carefully neutral. Roger looked uncomfortable, and both kids seemed genuinely sad that I was leaving. "Thank you for Christmas dinner," I said, setting my bag by the front door, "and for inviting me. It was educational." Roger stood up. "Dad, before you go, I want you to know that I'm proud of what you've built. Really proud. I just wish we'd known about it sooner." "Why?" I asked. "So you could have been part of it from the beginning, or so you could have found reasons why it wouldn't work." He didn't have an answer for that. Beverly cleared her throat. "Harold, I hope you'll give us another chance. Maybe we could plan a visit to your new condo soon. See your setup, learn more about what you do." "You're welcome to visit," I said, "but don't come because you want to see my setup or learn about my business. Come because you want to spend time with me as a person, not as a business opportunity." Sandra got up and hugged me. A real hug this time, not the polite kind Beverly had given me when I arrived. "Grandpa, I meant what I said about visiting. I really want to learn about what you do, not because of the money, but because it's cool that you figured out how to help people and build something meaningful. I'd love to teach you whatever you want to know," I said. "And not just about business, about anything." Glenn came over and gave me a hug too. "Thanks for the college money, Grandpa, and for thinking I was worth investing in. That hit me harder than I expected. You've always been worth investing in, buddy. Both of you have." I shook hands with Roger and nodded politely to Beverly. As I was putting my bag in the car, Sandra came running out with a folded piece of paper. "This is my real phone number and email," she said. "Not just the family group chat. I want to stay in touch for real." I took the paper and put it in my shirt pocket. "I'll call you next week, and Grandpa, yeah, what you did today was really brave, standing up for yourself like that. I hope I can be that brave when I need to be." The drive back to Charlotte gave me time to think about everything that had happened. I wasn't angry anymore, not really. I was just clear about what the relationships in my family actually were versus what I'd been pretending they were. About 30 minutes into the drive, my phone started buzzing with text messages. First Roger, then Beverly, then Roger again. I didn't read them while I was driving, but I could see the notifications piling up on my phone screen. When I got home, I made a cup of coffee and sat down at my kitchen table without looking at the messages. Instead, I opened my laptop and started working on my newsletter for the week. The subject line had been in my head since I left their house. "The gift you give yourself." I wrote about what it means to rebuild your sense of worth when the people closest to you stop seeing your value. About the quiet satisfaction of helping strangers who appreciate your knowledge. About the difference between being busy and being useful. About the importance of not waiting for other people's permission to matter. The article went out to 15,000 subscribers that evening. Within an hour, I had dozens of replies from men sharing their own stories of feeling invisible after retirement, of being treated like their knowledge had expired along with their employment. A guy from Arizona wrote, "Harold, you just described my last 3 Christmases. Thank you for showing me it's not too late to build something new." A retired teacher from Maine said, "I've been thinking about starting a tutoring business online. Your story gives me courage to try." An ex-banker from Ohio wrote, "My daughter-in-law treats me the same way Beverly treated you. Time to stop waiting for permission to be myself. These responses reminded me why I'd started the business in the first place. Not for the money, though that was nice. Not for recognition from my family, though I'd hoped for that. But for the connection with people who understood what it felt like to have valuable knowledge that nobody seemed to want anymore. Finally, around 9 p.m., I looked at the text messages that had been piling up throughout the afternoon. Roger, Dad, I hope you'll reconsider leaving things like this. We can work through this as a family. Beverly, Harold, I think there were some misunderstandings today. Let's talk soon and clear the air. Roger, I've been thinking about what you said. Maybe we haven't been as supportive as we should have been. Beverly, I hope you know how much we appreciate everything you've done for the children. We just need time to process all this information. Roger, can we have lunch next week? I'd like to understand your business better and figure out how we can have a better relationship going forward. I read through them all but didn't respond. Not because I was trying to punish anyone, but because I needed time to think about what kind of relationships were actually possible now that everything was out in the open. The truth was, I didn't need their approval anymore. I had work that mattered, people who valued my knowledge and financial independence. I had purpose and respect and the satisfaction of helping others. Whether my family chose to be part of that life was up to them. But I wasn't going to compromise what I'd built just to make them more comfortable with who I'd become. 3 months passed like pages turning in a book I actually wanted to read. The trees around Charlotte began to show the first signs of spring, and I settled into a rhythm that felt more natural than anything I'd experienced since Joyce died. My new condo downtown was everything I'd hoped it would be. 2 bedrooms with one converted into a proper office where I could take video calls with clients without worrying about background noise or lighting. The living room had floor-to-ceiling windows that looked out over the city, and I could walk to restaurants, the library, and even a few cultural events when I felt like being social. The business continued growing steadily. The newsletter I'd written about giving yourself permission to matter had been shared thousands of times across social media and retirement forums. It brought in over 2,000 new subscribers and generated more consultation bookings than I could handle. I raised my rates to $175 per session and started booking out 3 weeks in advance. The higher price actually seemed to make people take the advice more seriously. When someone pays $175 for an hour of your time, they come prepared with specific questions and they pay attention to the answers. The breakthrough that really changed everything came when Retirement Watch featured my Christmas story in their annual second act success issue. The editor had reached out after reading my newsletter, asking if I'd be willing to share the details about rebuilding purpose after family relationships shifted. I was hesitant at first. The story was personal, and I didn't want to embarrass Roger and Beverly publicly. But the editor convinced me that thousands of their readers were dealing with similar situations, feeling invisible after retirement, being dismissed by younger family members, struggling to find relevance in a world that seemed to value only youth and technology. The article was titled "The Consulting Business I Built While My Family Wasn't Looking." It ran in the March issue and was later republished on AARP's website and featured in 3 different retirement podcasts. The response was overwhelming. My email list grew by 5,000 subscribers in 2 weeks. I got interview requests from financial magazines, invitations to speak at retirement planning conferences, and partnership offers from companies that wanted me to create educational content for their older customers. One of the most meaningful responses came from a financial planning firm in Denver. They'd read my article and wanted to hire me as a consultant to help them better serve clients over 60. They were tired of losing older clients to companies that spoke their language better. The contract paid $3,000 a month for 10 hours of work, mostly reviewing their client communication materials and suggesting ways to make complex financial concepts more accessible to people who didn't grow up with smartphones and investment apps. By April, my monthly income was averaging $15,000. I was featured as a retirement success story in 2 national magazines and interviewed for a documentary about second careers after 60. More importantly, I was helping people in ways that felt genuinely meaningful. A retired nurse in Oregon used my Medicare guide to navigate a complex health situation that could have bankrupted her. A widower in Florida followed my estate planning advice and discovered his late wife's life insurance policy had benefits he didn't know existed. The work reminded me daily why I'd started the business in the first place. It wasn't about the money or the recognition, though both were nice. It was about using everything I'd learned over 42 years to make other people's lives a little easier and more secure. Sandra visited in late March during her spring break. She'd been accepted to her first choice art school with a partial scholarship, which meant the trust fund I'd set up would cover most of her remaining expenses. She spent a week with me, learning about website design, content creation, and online business basics. "Grandpa," she said one afternoon while we were working on her portfolio website, "I'm sorry about how everyone acted at Christmas. It was wrong, and I should have said something earlier. You were in a difficult position, I said. It wasn't your job to manage the adults, but I knew it was wrong. I could see how they were treating you, and I just went along with it because it was easier. What matters to me now is that you're here.
That you want to learn what I know? That you see me as someone who has something valuable to teach? She nodded. You do.
This business stuff is really interesting, but it's more than that. You've shown me that you don't have to accept other people's limits on what you can do. Glenn had been texting me regularly about baseball and money management. He was genuinely interested in learning about compound interest, investment basics, and how to make smart financial decisions with his summer job earnings. Our conversations were more substantial than any we'd had when he was younger. Roger and I had lunch once in February. The conversation was awkward at first, but gradually we found new ground to stand on. He asked real questions about my work, listened to the answers, and even asked for advice on his own retirement planning. Dad, I owe you an apology, he said toward the end of our meal. We treated you like you were becoming irrelevant, and that was completely wrong. I appreciate that, I said. Beverly's struggling more with all this. She's not used to being wrong about people, and she's having a hard time admitting she misjudged you so completely. She doesn't need to apologize to me, I said. She just needs to decide what kind of relationship she wants to have going forward. Beverly and I hadn't spoken directly since Christmas, though she'd sent a few text messages asking about my health and whether I needed anything. The messages felt obligatory rather than genuine, like items she was checking off a list. Looking back, the most valuable gift I'd given myself that Christmas wasn't revealing my business success. It was the decision to stop waiting for other people to make room for me at their table. Instead, I built my own table, and I left the chairs open for anyone who wanted to sit down and have a real conversation. The funny thing is, once I stopped needing their approval, I started getting their respect. Not from everyone, not all at once, but from the people who mattered. And I learned to tell the difference between the two. By summer, my business had evolved into something I never could have imagined when I bought that first laptop. I wasn't just helping individual retirees anymore. I was consulting with financial planning firms, creating educational content for major insurance companies, and speaking at conferences where retirement professionals came to learn how to better serve their older clients. The Denver financial planning firm had been so happy with my work that they'd recommended me to colleagues in other cities. I now had consulting contracts with firms in Phoenix, Atlanta, and Tampa. The work was fascinating, helping younger financial advisors understand how to communicate with clients who'd grown up in a different era with different expectations about money and retirement. Your generation built wealth differently, I explained to a group of 30-something advisors in a Phoenix conference room. They saved more, spent less, and trusted institutions more than today's retirees. But they also had pensions and employer-funded healthcare that today's workers can't count on. You need to understand both the mindset and the reality they're dealing with. These presentations paid $5,000 plus expenses for a full day of training. I was booking 2 to 3 per month, which meant my income had grown to levels I'd never imagined possible in retirement. But the most rewarding part wasn't the money. It was the emails from people who'd attended my sessions or read my articles, telling me how they'd changed their approach to serving older clients. A financial advisor in Miami said my communication strategies had helped her save a client from making a $50,000 mistake. A retirement planner in Seattle credited my Medicare guide with helping him explain supplement insurance options to confused seniors. I was making a difference on a scale that went far beyond my own bank account. Sandra had enrolled in her art school and was loving every minute of it. She called me regularly with updates on her classes and questions about managing her scholarship money and trust fund distributions. We'd developed a genuine relationship based on mutual respect rather than obligation. Glenn had made varsity baseball again as a junior and was getting interest from college scouts. His grades had improved too, partly because he was more motivated now that he understood how academic scholarships worked and what his college options might be. The financial pressure was off thanks to the trust fund, but he wanted to earn additional merit-based aid. "Grandpa," he said during one of our weekly phone calls, "I've been reading some of your articles about compound interest and long-term investing. Could we maybe start a small investment account with my summer job money?" These were the conversations I'd always hoped to have with my grandchildren. Real discussions about planning for the future, making smart choices, understanding how financial decisions today would affect their options tomorrow. Roger and I had settled into a new rhythm. We had lunch once a month and talked on the phone every couple of weeks. The conversations were more honest than they'd ever been. He'd finally acknowledged how Beverly had influenced family dynamics, and he was working to rebuild relationships with both his kids and me. I realized now that I was so focused on keeping peace that I let important relationships deteriorate, he told me during one of our lunches. I should have stood up for you more, should have insisted you be included in family decisions. The past is the past, I said. What matters is what we do going forward. Beverly was a different story entirely. She'd initially tried to maintain the pretense that nothing had changed, sending occasional texts about family events and holidays. But when I politely declined most invitations and continued building my life independently, she seemed to realize that the old dynamic was permanently broken. She made one last attempt to insert herself into my business success in May, when she reached out about a collaboration opportunity between my consultancy and her corporate training business. "Harold, I've been thinking about how we could combine our expertise," she said during a carefully scheduled phone call. "You understand the financial side, I understand corporate training and development. We could create programs for companies that are preparing their employees for retirement." It was actually a decent idea from a business perspective, but it was also exactly the kind of partnership offer I'd expected from Beverly once she realized I was successful. "I appreciate the suggestion," I said, "but I'm not looking for business partnerships right now. I like being able to make my own decisions about clients and content." "Are you sure the market for corporate retirement planning education is really expanding? We could probably land some significant contracts, I'm sure," I said. "But thanks for thinking of me." She didn't call again after that conversation. I think she finally understood that our relationship would be cordial but distant, and that my business success wasn't something she could leverage or control. The most surprising development came in August, when I got a call from a publisher in New York. They'd read my articles and wanted to know if I'd be interested in writing a book about starting a business after retirement. "We're seeing huge interest in this topic," the acquisitions editor explained. "Baby boomers are retiring with more education and better health than any previous generation. But they're also facing financial pressures that make complete retirement unrealistic for many people." The book deal wasn't going to make me rich. The advance was modest and royalties would depend on sales, but it was validation that my story resonated with people beyond my immediate audience. I signed the contract in September and spent the fall working on what would become second chapter strategies, building purpose and income after traditional retirement. The book combined practical advice about starting consulting businesses with personal stories from my own experience and case studies from other successful second-career entrepreneurs. Writing the book forced me to think deeply about what I'd learned over the past 3 years. It wasn't just about building a business or making money. It was about refusing to accept other people's limitations on what you can accomplish. It was about finding purpose and respect and meaningful work at a stage of life when society expects you to step aside gracefully. Most importantly, it was about not waiting for permission to matter. By Christmas of that second year, my life looked completely different from the one I'd had when Beverly first called with that unexpected invitation. I was financially independent, professionally respected, personally fulfilled, and genuinely useful to thousands of people who valued what I knew. I celebrated that Christmas in my downtown condo with Sandra, who was home from college, and Glenn, who drove down from Matthews by himself. We cooked dinner together, exchanged gifts, and talked about their plans for the future without anyone managing the conversation or editing my input. Roger joined us for dessert, and we had a pleasant evening that felt natural rather than obligated. Beverly was invited but declined, saying she had other commitments. That was fine with me. I'd learned that you can't force people to value you, but you also don't have to accept being undervalued. You can build something better instead. The book launched in March of my 3rd year in business, and the timing couldn't have been better. The economy was creating uncertainty for people approaching retirement, and there was growing interest in alternative income strategies for older adults. Second Chapter Strategies debuted at number 8 on the business bestseller list and stayed in the top 20 for 6 weeks. The publisher was thrilled and immediately started talking about a second book focused specifically on consulting businesses for retirees. More importantly for me, the book opened doors I never could have anticipated. I was invited to keynote a major retirement planning conference in Las Vegas, where 2,000 financial professionals gathered to learn about serving the growing population of active retirees. The traditional model of retirement work until 65, then stop completely, is becoming obsolete, I told the audience. Today's retirees are healthier, more educated, and facing financial pressures that make continued income essential. But they're also dealing with age discrimination and technology gaps that make traditional employment challenging. The speech was recorded and later featured on 3 different business podcasts. It led to speaking engagements at universities, corporate training sessions for companies preparing employees for retirement, and consulting opportunities with organizations that served older adults. By spring, I was averaging $20,000 per month in revenue from consulting, speaking, writing, and digital products. I'd helped over 5,000 people navigate retirement financial decisions through my courses and consultations. I had corporate partnerships with 8 major financial services companies. But the numbers, impressive as they were, weren't what got me up in the morning anymore. What motivated me was the constant stream of emails and letters from people whose lives had been improved by information I'd shared. A retired mechanic in Oregon wrote to thank me for helping him understand long-term care insurance options that protected his wife's health needs without bankrupting them. A widow in North Carolina said my estate planning guide had helped her discover assets her late husband had forgotten about. A former teacher in Texas credited my Medicare articles with saving her $3,000 a year in unnecessary coverage. These weren't just financial transactions. They were real people making better decisions because someone had taken the time to explain their options in language they could understand. Sandra graduated from art school that spring with a degree in graphic design and a portfolio that had already landed her 2 freelance clients. She'd used some of her trust fund money to buy professional equipment and was planning to start her own design business while working part-time for an advertising agency. "You inspired me, Grandpa," she said during our celebration dinner at her graduation. "Not just with the money for school, but with the example of building something meaningful later in life. If you can start a successful business at 67, I can certainly try to build one at 22. Glenn had committed to play baseball at a Division II college with a combination of athletic and academic scholarships. The trust fund would cover his remaining expenses, allowing him to focus on his studies and athletics without taking on debt or working part-time jobs that might interfere with his performance. "Thanks to you, I can just be a student athlete," he told me during one of our regular phone calls. "I don't have to worry about money or student loans or whether I can afford to stay in school if I get injured." Roger had been promoted to regional sales director and was making more money than ever before. More importantly, he'd become a more involved father and grandfather, no longer deferring all family decisions to Beverly. I realized that I'd been letting other people make important choices for our family, he told me during one of our monthly lunches. "That wasn't fair to you, and it wasn't fair to my kids either." He and Beverly were going to marriage counseling to work through some of the issues that had been exposed by my Christmas revelation. The counselor had apparently told them that healthy families include multiple generations in decision-making rather than cutting off older members when they become inconvenient. Beverly herself had become a non-factor in my life. We exchanged polite greetings at family events when our paths crossed, but there was no warmth or genuine connection. She'd apparently told Roger that she found my success threatening and preferred to maintain distance rather than acknowledge how wrong she'd been about my capabilities. That was fine with me. I'd learned not to waste energy trying to change people who were determined to see me as less than I was. The real vindication came in November when I was invited to speak at the annual conference of the National Association of Insurance Commissioners. They wanted me to address the challenges of serving older consumers in an increasingly digital marketplace. I stood before 800 insurance executives and regulators representing the same industry where I'd spent 42 years of my career and delivered a presentation about the importance of respecting older customers' knowledge and experience. The insurance industry has a choice, I told them. You can treat aging customers as problems to be managed, or you can recognize them as experienced consumers who deserve respect and clear communication. The companies that choose respect will earn loyalty and referrals. The companies that choose condescension will lose market share to competitors who understand the value of treating all customers with dignity. The presentation received a standing ovation and was later published in Insurance Journal as a feature article. Several company executives approached me afterward about consulting opportunities to help them improve their service to older customers. Walking off that stage, I thought about the man I'd been 3 years earlier. Sitting alone in my rental house, feeling invisible and irrelevant, wondering if my knowledge and experience had any value in the modern world. That man could never have imagined speaking to industry leaders about customer service strategies, or writing books that influenced thousands of people, or building a business that generated more income than his corporate salary had ever provided. The transformation hadn't happened overnight, and it hadn't been easy, but it had been entirely possible once I stopped waiting for other people's permission to be valuable. As I drove home from that conference, I thought about the Christmas morning when everything changed. Not because I revealed my success to my family, but because I finally understood that their opinion of my worth didn't determine my actual worth. I'd built something real and meaningful and lasting. Whether they chose to be part of it or not was their decision. But the building itself, the work, the impact, the respect, the financial security, that belonged to me, and nobody could take it away. 3 years after that Christmas morning revelation, I found myself mentoring other men who were facing similar crossroads in their own lives. The success of my book had led to speaking invitations not just at business conferences, but at community centers and senior groups where men in their 60s and 70s gathered to figure out what came next. These conversations were different from my consulting work with individual clients. They weren't about specific financial decisions or insurance questions. They were about something more fundamental: how to rebuild purpose and respect when society assumes your useful years are behind you. I worked 38 years as a high school principal. One man told me after a presentation in Raleigh, I knew how to solve problems, manage budgets, deal with difficult personalities, but my own kids treat me like I don't understand how the world works anymore. His story was so similar to mine that it was almost painful to hear. The details were different: education instead of insurance, different family dynamics, but the core issue was identical. Knowledge and experience being dismissed as outdated rather than valued as wisdom. I'd started an informal group that met monthly at my condo building's community room. 15 to 20 men, mostly retired professionals, who were dealing with the transition from being respected experts in their fields to being treated like pleasant but irrelevant old men by their families and former colleagues. We called it the Second Chapter Society, and it had become one of the most meaningful parts of my work. These men weren't looking for financial advice or business strategies. They were looking for permission to still matter and examples of how that might be possible. The hardest part isn't learning new skills, said a former bank vice president during one of our meetings. It's believing that anyone wants to hear what I have to offer. That's exactly where I started. I told the group the technology was challenging and the marketing was confusing, but the real obstacle was convincing myself that my experience still had value in a world that seemed to worship youth and innovation above everything else. We developed what I called the Useful Knowledge Inventory, a systematic way for men to identify skills and expertise they'd accumulated over their careers that could be relevant to current problems. Most of them discovered they knew more than they realized about topics that other people needed help with. A retired engineer had started consulting on home improvement projects for people who wanted professional advice but couldn't afford architectural fees. A former restaurant manager was teaching food service safety to small business owners. An ex-police officer had become a security consultant for local businesses. None of them became millionaires, but all of them regained the sense of being valued for their knowledge rather than tolerated despite their age. That transformation in self-perception was worth more than any amount of money. The most satisfying success story was a man named Carl Patterson, who'd been an insurance claims investigator for 30 years before being forced into early retirement when his company downsized. His adult children lived across the country and rarely called. His wife had died 2 years earlier, and he was spending most of his time watching TV and feeling sorry for himself. I thought I was done, he told the group during his first meeting. I figured the best I could hope for was to not be a burden to anybody. 6 months later, Carl had launched a consulting business helping small businesses understand their insurance coverage and file claims properly. He was making $4,000 a month and had clients who relied on his expertise to protect their investments. More importantly, he'd reconnected with his children, who suddenly had more respect for their father once they realized he was building something meaningful rather than just marking time until he died. "You gave me my life back," Carl told me during one of our private conversations. Not just the business stuff, but the belief that I could still contribute something valuable. These were the moments that reminded me why I'd started the consulting business in the first place. It wasn't about revenge against Beverly or proving anything to Roger. It was about refusing to accept society's assumption that retirement meant becoming useless. My relationship with my own family had evolved into something more honest and sustainable. Sandra was thriving in her design career and called regularly to discuss both business challenges and personal decisions. She valued my advice not just about financial matters, but about dealing with difficult clients, setting boundaries, and building professional credibility. Glenn had finished his sophomore year of college with good grades and was being recruited by some Division I programs for potential transfers. The trust fund had eliminated financial pressure, allowing him to focus on academics and athletics. More importantly, our regular conversations had evolved into genuine friendship rather than obligatory check-ins. Roger and I had developed a relationship based on mutual respect rather than family obligation. He asked for my advice on business decisions, career moves, and parenting challenges. He also shared his struggles with rebuilding his marriage and learning to assert himself in family discussions. Beverly's learning to accept that she can't control everything. He told me during one of our conversations, "The counselor made her realize that excluding you from family decisions wasn't protecting our independence, it was limiting our resources." Beverly herself had become a cautionary tale that I sometimes shared with the Second Chapter Society, though I never mentioned her by name. She represented the mindset that treats aging family members as problems to be managed rather than resources to be valued. Some people in your life will never accept that you've grown beyond their expectations. I told the group, your job isn't to convince them. Your job is to build something meaningful regardless of their opinions. I'd recently signed a contract for my second book, which would focus specifically on family relationships during retirement transitions. The publisher wanted practical advice for both retirees and their adult children about maintaining respect and connection across generations. The research for that book had convinced me that the issues I'd faced with Beverly and Roger were part of a much larger cultural problem. American society had created a narrative that aging meant declining relevance, and many families had internalized that assumption without questioning it. My story had become an example of a different possibility, that experience and knowledge could be leveraged into new forms of value and respect, even when traditional career structures ended. The Christmas morning when I pulled out my briefcase full of business documents wasn't the end of anything. It was the beginning of understanding that respect isn't automatically granted based on age or family relationships. It has to be earned and maintained through continued contribution and growth. At 70, I was more successful, more respected, and more useful than I'd ever been. Not because age had made me wiser, but because I'd refused to accept limitations that other people tried to impose on me. That was the real gift I'd given myself, the gift of continued relevance in a world that assumes irrelevance is inevitable. Looking back now, I realized that Christmas morning wasn't just about proving my family wrong. It was about proving to myself that I still had something valuable to offer the world, even if the people closest to me couldn't see it. The business had grown beyond anything I'd imagined when I bought that first laptop. My second book, Family Bridges, Maintaining Respect Across Generations, was being used by family counselors and elder care professionals across the country. I was consulting with organizations that served older adults, helping them understand how to engage their clients as knowledgeable partners rather than dependent recipients of services. But the most meaningful measure of success wasn't in the revenue reports or speaking fees. It was in the thousands of emails from people who'd used my advice to make better financial decisions, avoid costly mistakes, or rebuild confidence in their own knowledge and experience. A retired nurse in Seattle had written to tell me that my Medicare guide helped her navigate her husband's complex health situation without going into debt. A former teacher in Phoenix said my estate planning articles convinced her to update documents that would have left her children with unnecessary legal complications. These weren't just business transactions. They were real people whose lives had been improved because someone took the time to explain complex topics in language they could understand, without talking down to them or assuming they couldn't handle sophisticated information. That had been the key to everything, treating older adults as intelligent consumers who deserved respect, not as confused seniors who needed simple answers to complicated questions. I'd recently been invited to testify before a congressional subcommittee about financial services for aging Americans. The committee was investigating complaints about companies that targeted older consumers with misleading insurance and investment products. The problem isn't that older adults can't understand complex financial concepts, I told the committee. The problem is that too many companies assume they can't and design their marketing and sales processes accordingly. When you treat intelligent people like they're confused, you create actual confusion. The testimony led to new guidelines for financial services companies about age-appropriate communication that respected customers' intelligence while acknowledging their different communication preferences. Sitting in that congressional hearing room, representing the interests of millions of older Americans, I thought about the man I'd been 4 years earlier. Sitting alone on Christmas morning, feeling forgotten and irrelevant, wondering if anyone would ever value his opinions again. That transformation was now the foundation of everything I taught other men in similar situations. The path from feeling invisible to becoming influential wasn't about luck or special talent. It was about refusing to accept other people's assumptions about what you could accomplish. Sandra had gotten engaged to a fellow graphic designer she'd met at work. They were planning a small wedding and had asked me to walk her down the aisle since her father would be performing other duties. The request meant more to me than any business achievement because it showed that our relationship had evolved into something based on genuine affection rather than family obligation. "You've taught me that you don't have to accept limitations other people try to put on you," she told me when she asked me to take on that role. "That's something I want to remember on my wedding day." Glenn had transferred to a Division I school where he was playing baseball and studying sports management. He called me regularly for advice about everything from academic decisions to financial planning to relationship challenges. Our conversations felt like the kind I'd always hoped to have with my grandchildren. Real discussions between adults who respected each other's perspectives. Roger had been promoted again and was now managing a multi-state territory for his medical equipment company. More importantly, he'd learned to value his father's opinion and include me in family decisions that affected everyone. I realize now that I was so worried about Beverly's approval that I forgot about everyone else's feelings. He told me during a recent conversation, "That wasn't fair to you, and it wasn't fair to my kids either." He and Beverly had worked through their marriage issues with professional help, but their relationship was different now. She had less control over family dynamics, and Roger made more independent decisions about how to spend their time and money. Beverly herself had started her own consulting business, ironically using some of the same online marketing strategies I'd pioneered for my financial planning consultancy. She was successful in her own right, though. We still maintained only polite distance when our paths crossed at family events. I'd recently moved to a larger condo in the same building with space for a proper home office and guest rooms for when Sandra and Glenn visited. The extra space also allowed me to host meetings of the Second Chapter Society and small workshops for men who were starting their own consulting businesses. The view from my new office window showed downtown Charlotte's growing skyline, with construction cranes building new towers that would house the kinds of businesses I now consulted with regularly. It was a reminder that growth and change were constants, and that staying relevant meant continuing to adapt and learn. At 70, I was busier and more engaged than I'd been at any point since Joyce died. I had work that mattered, relationships based on mutual respect, financial security beyond anything I'd imagined possible in retirement, and the satisfaction of helping thousands of people make better decisions about their futures. Most importantly, I'd learned the difference between being included and being valued, between being tolerated and being respected. That knowledge had changed everything about how I approached relationships and opportunities. The gift I'd given myself that Christmas morning wasn't the revelation of my business success. It was the decision to stop waiting for other people's permission to matter, and nobody could take that away from me. The phone rang on a Wednesday morning in October, almost 5 years to the day after that first forgotten birthday that changed everything. It was Sandra, calling with news that would complete the circle in ways I never could have anticipated. "Grandpa, I wanted you to hear this first," she said, her voice excited but nervous. "I just got offered a contract to design educational materials for a major financial services company. They specifically requested me because of my connection to Harold Brennan." She paused, and I could hear her smiling through the phone. "They want materials that help explain retirement planning to older adults in a respectful, clear way. They said your work has influenced how the entire industry thinks about serving that demographic." It was one of those moments when you realize that success isn't just about what you accomplish, but about how that accomplishment opens doors for the people you care about. Sandra wasn't succeeding because of family connections or favoritism. She was succeeding because she'd learned to value the knowledge and experience that older adults bring to every situation. "That's wonderful," I said. "You've earned that opportunity. I learned from the best," she replied. "You showed me that respecting people's intelligence and experience isn't just good business. It's the right way to treat human beings." After we hung up, I sat in my office looking out at the Charlotte skyline and thinking about the journey that had brought me to this point. 5 years ago, I'd been a forgotten man feeling sorry for himself. Today, I was influencing an entire industry's approach to customer service while watching my granddaughter build her own career on principles I'd helped her understand. The Second Chapter Society had grown from our small monthly meetings to a network of chapters in 12 cities. Men across the country were discovering that retirement didn't have to mean irrelevance, that experience and knowledge could be transformed into new forms of value and respect. Carl Patterson, the former claims investigator who'd been ready to give up, now led the Charlotte chapter and had helped 50 other men start consulting businesses based on their professional expertise. His own business was generating $8,000 a month, and more importantly, his adult children now called him regularly for advice about everything from insurance decisions to career challenges. "You didn't just teach me to build a business," Carl told me during our recent conversation. "You taught me that my life wasn't over just because my career ended." That sentiment appeared in dozens of emails I received every week from men who'd attended my presentations or read my books. The specific details varied: different careers, different family situations, different financial goals, but the core message was always the same. They'd rediscovered their own value by refusing to accept society's assumptions about aging and irrelevance. My consulting practice was now booking speaking engagements 6 months in advance. The second book had become required reading in several graduate programs that trained financial advisors and elder care professionals. I'd been invited to advise a federal task force on age discrimination in financial services, but the metrics that mattered most weren't the professional achievements or financial milestones. They were the personal relationships that had been rebuilt on foundations of mutual respect rather than family obligation. Roger and I talked every week, not because we had to, but because we genuinely enjoyed each other's company. He valued my business advice, and I appreciated his perspectives on managing people and navigating corporate politics. We'd become colleagues as well as father and son. Glenn was graduating next spring with a degree in sports management and a job offer from a minor league baseball organization. He credited our regular conversations about financial planning and career development with helping him make smart decisions about his future. Even Beverly had grudgingly acknowledged my success, though we still maintained careful distance. She'd recently asked Roger to pass along a compliment about an article I'd written for AARP's magazine. It wasn't much, but it was progress. The most meaningful validation came from an unexpected source. Joyce's sister Martha, who lived in Florida and hadn't spoken to me much since the funeral, called to tell me how proud Joyce would have been of what I'd accomplished. "She always said you were stronger than you knew," Martha told me. "She worried about what would happen to you after she was gone, whether you'd just give up and fade away. But look at you now. You've built something amazing." That conversation reminded me that the journey hadn't started with being forgotten by my family. It had started with losing the person who'd believed in me most. Everything that came after, the business, the books, the speaking engagements, the restored relationships, was my way of honoring her memory by becoming the man she'd always seen in me. 5 years later, I wake up every morning knowing that thousands of people value what I have to share. I help families make better financial decisions. I teach other men that retirement can be a beginning rather than an ending. I show people that respect is earned through continued contribution, not automatically granted because of age or family relationships. And when I sit down at my kitchen table with my coffee and my laptop, I'm not just keeping busy anymore. I'm building something that matters, helping people who want my help, and proving every day that the best chapters of your life might be the ones you write for yourself. That's the gift I gave myself that Christmas morning when I reached into my briefcase instead of feeling sorry for myself. The gift of knowing that I still had something valuable to offer the world, even if it took my own family a while to figure that out. The gift of refusing to be invisible when I knew I could choose to be influential instead. Sometimes the people who dismiss you the most are preparing you for the success they never thought you'd achieve. Their underestimation becomes your greatest motivation to prove that worth isn't determined by age, but by the value you choose to create. The most powerful revenge isn't making others suffer for overlooking you. It's building something so meaningful that their opinion becomes irrelevant while your impact becomes undeniable.